Our Citywide Advisory Committee meeting on October 27th. Normally Andrea does this, so we're a little lackluster today. She's at a conference this week, so thanks for your patience. And we have quite a few online as well. And we'll go ahead and kick it off. Making sure everybody can see the screen okay. Sorry, that's kind of hard to read. This is just the agenda. So we'll just give a couple updates that we have going on, just in terms of community outreach and a few things that we've heard, general comments on the full code. We'll go through some code testing, a couple of walkthroughs that Diane is here for. Next steps, then of course, open up for questions and comments that we've had here as well.
Hey, Lindsay, just really quick, because we have a few new people joining us.
Yes,
so I
I'm
want to
sorry.
just do
Thank
some
you.
quick introductions.
Yes.
So we have, Diane is not new, but Diane Cushwan is with us today. And she'll be helping us out with some of the, like Lindsay said, the walkthrough of some different scenarios of actually testing the code. We have Aaron. Aaron, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, my name is Aaron.
Wait, use the mic.
My name is Aaron Williams. I'm an intern for PDS, and I currently am getting my graduate degree at Boise State in public administration.
And then we also have Emily Dixon with us.
Hi, I'm Emily Dixon. I'm the data analyst for PDS, and I also do GIS mapping.
We'll give Emily tons of praise on all the work she's done for us later. But so just a few updates that I have from community engagement. The first one is we have posted the summary that was for Module 1 and Module 2 outreach this past summer. So that's on our website. We have had 2 of our 5 meetings so far. So thank you all that have come to those and attended. We got 3 more, and those dates will be at the end as well. Those have been going pretty decently. Lots of different discussions, a lot focused on kind of neighborhoods and making sure those are quality conversations. We also have published, we're calling it an online open house. Essentially, it's kind of the hybrid between the boards and the PowerPoint that you have seen out at Outreach. So you can go through and kind of read that. We provide just a little bit of context because we understand that sometimes reading 700 pages is not in everybody's exciting days. Anyway, so that kind of takes you through just the overview of the same information that we're presenting at the Outreach. And then there is one draft code correction that we have made just recently in the last couple of days that we'll get to as well.
Yeah, so something to just update everyone on from when we last met in September and in our publishing of the revised draft with Module 3 and in our outreach. There's this process that we've been articulating that depending on the type of application and if you are an allowed use with an allowed form, you would be a type 2 application in most cases. And if you're an allowed use in an alternative form, you would become a type 3 application. And in applying that to the various aspects of the code, there is a section about the infill incentive that you may all recall, that if you are within a certain proximity of our best in class corridors and you qualify because you have X amount of frontage, there's an assessed value of the property that's less than the land, and there like kind of a couple of scenario requirements you have to have. That would read that that's an if you redevelop that single family parcel and do not take advantage of the infill incentive, that if you were to read it as that's an allowed use, and you don't want to build, say, like a cottage corridor or multifamily, that would be an alternative form. There was a language in the code that said that you would have to go for a conditional use permit and be treated as a type 3 application. That was a mistake. And so we didn't catch that as far as like, the rule is you do this when you do that, and you do this when you do that. That infill incentive wasn't meant to apply to that. So we just wanted to flag it that we did strike that language because it was a mistake from the draft that we had put on the website, and just updated it with the correct language. But someone did notice it and asked us about it, so we just at least wanted to call out that there is a 2.0 version, and it's mainly just getting rid of that language because it wasn't meant to apply for that. By right, with a single family home parcel, you you can rebuild a single family home, you have the option to take advantage of an infill incentive. So the allowed use alternative form doesn't apply to the incentive. Sorry if that's a little confusing. But that was just one update we wanted to provide you all with. Right. Sorry, guys. You wanted me to just speak to our next outreach opportunities. So Lindsay had mentioned that we did already have our 2 events at Timberline and Bora. So these are the dates for the other upcoming opportunities for Module 3. Next is November 3rd at Capitol High School. We'll have a Zoom discussion from noon to 1 on November 8th. November 16th, evening meeting at Ada County Library on Victory. And November 17th, we'll be speaking at the Neighborhood Association Leadership Meeting from 5:30 to 7. So ample opportunity. Really appreciate all of you who have already attended in Module 1, Module 2, revised Module 1 and Module 2, and then Module 3 coming out to our events. It's been just really great to have so much engagement. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Thank you. I'm going to demonstrate. Ooh.
So real quick, Lindsay, if you want to go to the next slide, just for a little bit of background on this. So I think we talked about this last time, but just as a quick refresher. So, our sort of conceptual framework that we came up with for Module 3, one of the key components of that is that we wanted to make sure that we're involving our community and partners early in the process. I lost my slide, but I think I can kind of just do it verbally. But anyways, oh, there it goes. Okay. So this concept of like involving community and partners early, and what does that mean? So if you go one more slide, there's a couple different ways that we had proposed doing that. One of them would be with this community development tracker. So Lindsay, are you the one advancing the slides, or is there it's me? Yeah, next one. Okay, thanks. So there's a couple different ways we do this. Is when we would have neighborhood meetings, how we would kind of handle the conversation between developers, neighborhoods, and PDS. And then one of the things that we were most excited about was coming up with what we're calling a community development tracker. So that's a mapping tool that would allow you to see what kind of projects are actually live throughout the city. And so that's why Emily's here with us today, to kind of give us a quick walkthrough on that. And hopefully some of you have had a chance to take a look at that, play around with it. And we're hoping that you might have some feedback for us as well. Thank you. And then Emily and we can sort of field those questions and then figure out what we might want to flag going forward. So Emily, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Got it. Okay, to access this map, you go to the zoning code rewrite on the city's website. And you scroll down and it's called the Community Development Tracker. So how this tool works is in our permitting and licensing system, when people pull a permit, I take the data from that and I take the location based on the parcel, and then we're able to map it within 24 hours. It's mapped based on status. So you'll see this legend here shows the different statuses. So it'll only show projects that are accepted in review, returned to applicant, review complete, in the hearing prep, or appealed. So once it's either been approved, denied, or withdrawn, it'll disappear from the map. So this is only things that are active and it's updated within 24 hours. You can click on any of the permits areas and get additional information. So this tells you the status, when we received it, what's the type of application, who the review authority is. So this one will eventually go to City Council. And then it has just the beginning of the description. If you want more information, you can click on this view button and this will take you to the website. This website, okay, it's right here. So search for it and then you can click here to get more information. This website has always been public and publicly available, but there was just not like an easy way for people to access and see where it was, especially be able to look at it spatially and see, you know, what's going on in my neighborhood. But you can go into here, you can get more detailed information. You can go into here also, see record details, documents, inspections. So it's just a way to connect data that was already out there more easily. Another thing to notice, you can click through, if there's multiple permits, sometimes there'll be multiple permit types for the same development essentially. So you can click through and see each of the different permit types. And then another thing you can do is if you go down to the contact us link, if you click on it, it will, oh, mine's not working right now. If you don't have my computer, it should open up an email that'll automatically say sent into the zoning info at cityofboise.org, and then it puts the permit number in the subject line. So you can type your comment, it'll get sent to the city, and then they know what case it's referring to. So I think that's all I have. Is there anything else?
Can you show on the main webpage? And this is embedded on the, if you haven't been on it yet, on the zoning code website, embedded below, I believe all of this, it's, we're accepting comment on it. And so this is still, it's works, but we want to figure out how to improve the functionality so that this is something that is a tool for residents of our city, and to make it useful so that they can be invited to participate in the process and know where things are within the process. So accepting comment on it, we're open to answer questions about it now, or if anyone's been able to work through it, we'd be happy to take that.
I got a question, and maybe I just didn't fiddle around with it enough, but I was looking through a project, and I think the design review number was listed, but I don't know if the design review, like if I could access the design review, like application documents. So if I wanted to get into that, is that an option?
I think so. I'll show you how to access the documents. And I don't know, I'm not totally familiar with what all is available on our public site. But if you wanted to go into the documents in this, so this is our permitting and licensing site. And then if you click into this record info and documents, you can click here and see the documents. And then you can click on the application. I'm not sure, there might be some limits. So this is just the application. So I don't know what limits we put on that right now. Yeah.
What project
Ooh,
is that?
I
What
can't see.
status is that in?
This one I clicked on was, it was red, so it's in review.
Yeah, okay. I believe that through Acela, we should be able to see any document that the planner has uploaded. So it may not have been uploaded yet if there were additional like site plan documents. So it is as fast as it's uploaded into the system.
And would this just be limited to planning documents, or is it also encompass design review as well? Or is that kind of a separate thing? Is there any way to tie into that, I guess is what I'm asking.
Design review records are in here, but I don't, or design review, like the data is here for design review, but I don't know about the records.
Got it.
For design review, historic preservation, and planning and zoning, I think there's a difference between when it's in review versus review is complete and hearing prep. So by hearing prep, there'll be like the report, it's just whether or not it's scheduled for hearing or not. But the intention is for for each of the different commissions and committees, the documents you can get.
And I guess lastly, I want to say this tool is awesome. Great work. I think this is going to be a huge help for, people in the building industry and for the community to kind of see what's going on around them. So I applaud you on this. This is cool. So.
Yeah, so this is just a design review or application, and it does have elevations, floor plans, existing site plan, proposed site plan.
And one thing that we should say, so this is built, the statuses are for our existing code because it's showing live time, our real code and our real applications that are being accepted. We 100% intend to massage the statuses to align with the new process. So it may not say accepted. It might say, conceptual review, mid-process review, similar to those new words and process that we're proposing in the new code. And it will say, type 1 application, type 2 application. So just again, reinforcing our new process.
And then there's a few comments online with a question. And then Richard has his hand raised. So there was just a couple compliments from Drew, Byron, and Roberta is just saying this is a great tool. And Francis agreed. And she had a follow-up question. If the project has already been approved, is there a similar easy spatial tool that can be accessed view details on the project? Which is something I think we've talked about as in the future, maybe too.
Yeah, we have talked about it. It's tricky because we'd have to know how far, because we have data going back to like the 90s. We can't map everything, but how far do we want to do? We do want to do like approved in the last 6 months, approved in the last year. So that's something to think about. One limitation of our system is it might be approved. We don't know, we probably wouldn't know when a building permit was pulled on it. So in the ideal world, we could show everything that was approved until a building permit was pulled and then start showing the building permits, but we can't do that right now.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. Exactly. And then Richard, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I agree. Really great tool. I think it really fills a void and it would really be helpful. Yeah. So if you just kind of addressed it, going back in or retaining these once the approval is done, sounds like you're thinking about it. So that's good. I think especially maybe, we have in my neighborhood, there can be lots that were approved, maybe 5 years ago. And so people often wonder what's happening there. So that could really be helpful, just kind of to check on, if they just moved there or whatever, what to expect, and or is the project kind of, is it being developed in the way that was approved, et cetera. And I didn't totally see this, and I will go and look at this and we'll try to provide detailed feedback. But if there are the dates of hearings and things that are kind of up close, maybe you had that. I just maybe didn't see. Yeah, so maybe even on that page, like the next hearing or something, that might be kind of difficult. But something like that, thinking that people might be looking at this who really aren't very familiar kind of with the whole public process system in general. So that might help, like the next, comment period or something like that. But thank you. It's really good.
Great recommendations.
Could I bother you to go through the process again on this map? Maybe pick a spot here and just walk through what the proposed development is, what the documentation is, whatever. Could I pick a spot? It's the blue spot down south.
here or
Further south than that, South Cole.
oh, way south. Yes.
Yeah,
Here?
right there.
Okay. So here's Mario Farms. Current status is returned to applicant.
So somebody has applied for something and has it been approved and returned? I mean, what does that mean?
So at the bottom, we do have descriptions of what the different statuses mean. And so return to applicant is the planner has requested more information from the applicant. It hasn't been approved yet. It's still kind of in the review process. Yeah, and if you could, if we could provide more clarity in the descriptions too, let us know.
Yeah, and that's like, but to there, yeah, so this is public record. Sorry. And this is public record. And so this has always been on the website, but in not this simple of a form. So we're trying to make it so more transparent so that you go, oh, I see something I'm curious or interested or want to know more about. Hopefully this is more accessible. You could click on it, see what the status is, see if there's any documents that support it, and learn more about it.
It's all dated.
Yeah.
And Esther had a comment online briefly that just said, identifying the next comment period is key to have on the mapping tool. Community members want to know that level of info as well, just reiterating kind of Richard's comment. So, and Richard, you still have your hand up. Did you have another comment or question?
No, sorry, just missed my hand. I'll take it down.
Just checking. Thanks.
This is Deanna. I think one thing we've thought about with providing information on next comment date, I think milestones like public hearing are definitely tangible once it's scheduled. I think that with having the contact the planner kind of at any point is that you can always send a planner information on that specific project and it goes on the public record. So that's why we have that contact us and the direct email, because they're always able to provide that information. And I think with our new process, being more clear about how the application is developed. So as we said, our current process, you could go from 0 to 100. A developer brings in whatever type of application they want. You'll have more transparency on, is it at concept review, mid-process review? And so what type of, as a resident, what type of feedback and at what level they are in the planning process. So if you're seeing something that's at final review, I forget what we called that last one, but basically final review or application submittal, that they have gone through concept review, mid-process review. So you're just going to know where it is in that spectrum.
There was another comment for Francis. Thank you for considering post-approval. I think one thing that might trigger an inquiry is when the community members have missed the public comment in design approval process, and then they see a parcel under construction. They may want to look it up to see what's happening. I would imagine a year's worth of accessibility might be a minimum. So that's great feedback as well.
And Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, we could potentially do a similar map with just building permit. So there's the planning permit and then your building permit.
Yeah, I've been working on mapping the building permits. We'd probably want to look because, you can get a building permit for putting new siding on a house or replacing windows. So we'll want to see which ones are most important. But yes, we can get a similar map with building permits.
Any other questions or comments or thoughts about the development tracker tool? Great.
And
I guess the last thing I would just add quickly too is that certainly as we've gone through this process, this is definitely not a new tool in the sense of like planning tools that are out there. There's a lot of cities, even just in the West, that have tools that are similar to this. And we've had some time to do research and kind of get inspired from what other communities have done. So if it's something that you're interested in and want to kind of see what the possibilities that are out there, you can always look in other municipalities. Spokane, Washington has one, Seattle, Washington. I think there's a couple. Bozeman, Montana has one that is pretty cool. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, and would just recommend if it's a tool that you're interested in and want to learn more, you can always check those out too.
We've also talked about, and I can't remember if we mentioned this at our last meeting too, like if this is a great tool for neighborhood associations too, to be able to, map out your area, be able to pull a report, some of those feedback and comments would be great too, to figure out if we can implement some of those tools. Or even if you're just a neighbor and you want to get an email anytime an application goes within 300 feet or something like that. Again, some of those comments or maybe might be helpful for us as well as we try to prioritize what capabilities and tools we can build out for this. So just food for thought as well. And there's no more comments or hands raised online. So maybe we move on from here.
All right. So at this point, in this part of our agenda, we wanted to take some time for just to hear what your general feedback might be. So the consolidated draft has been out for a little while now. Hopefully you may have had a chance to look through it, you probably have some ideas, questions, and comments that are starting to form. And Diane, this is where I'm going to kind of start to kick it over to you in terms of just sort of helping to facilitate this conversation. But we really wanted to open the floor up and see what you all have been thinking and starting to go through this review, and if there's anything you'd like to flag or discuss with the committee.
Yeah, and I know some of you have been at community meetings as well. So anything in your formal or informal conversations that you heard at those meetings to share with everybody would be helpful as well. Should I call on somebody?
I see Richard's hand up. Go for it, Richard.
Don't worry. I will. I will use my allotted time. We didn't hear last time. We didn't get to why the PUD was moved from Planning and Zoning Commission straight to City Council, and I have some pretty strong feelings about that. In a neighborhood like mine, where we still have fairly large lots, planned unit developments I think are often appropriate. I think they can be a good tool. The standard idea is to cluster density and maybe have some usable open space, but I'm sure there's other reasons. Though we did hear from our consultant early on that Boise seems to perhaps overuse planned unit developments, and I think that's likely also true. But in our neighborhood, if there is if we're seeing an application from likely a big and powerful developer, our window for making any kind of suggestions that may actually be heard and that may actually lead to what we believe to be a better development is often in the window between Planning and Zoning Commission and an appeal to City Council, either from the applicant or from the residents. And if we no longer have that window and just go straight to City Council with a PUD, there just isn't that time kind of to mature the process. And if an applicant is the one appealing because Planning and Zoning either denied the PUD or required something of the applicant they don't want to address or meet, at least then it does put a burden on the applicant to kind of think or discuss or justify their position. And so without that window, I'm afraid that City Council they'll feel the pressure to either deny it or maybe rework the PUD from the dais, which is difficult, of course, without that kind of time period for maturation. So,
Richard, so we are triple checking just to make sure, but that a PUD would go to planning and zoning first.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
It will act like so Richard, it's very, how we have it written, a PUD is essentially a rezone. So it will go to planning and zoning for recommendation and then City Council for final approval.
Yeah. Anything that's a type 4 that says City Council has a decision-making body before it.
Okay.
Just that
So
it also requires it to go to City Council.
okay. So currently it goes right to planning and zoning for the and planning and zoning is the decision body on a PUD. And so now it's going to, okay, right. So it would still go to planning and zoning for a recommendation, like a rezone.
Yeah.
But right. Well, that's a slightly better, but still without that decision point at planning and zoning. It doesn't, a recommendation is different than a decision. And so that there would be no appeal period there. And yes, I know people can appeal beyond City Council, but that's extremely unlikely. So at any rate, thanks for the clarification, but moving the decision body from from planning and zoning to city council on a PUD. One, we didn't hear why the city wants to do that. So that would, I think, maybe the rationale for that is a good place to start. But I think my comments stand. So
So
thank you.
Richard, a couple of things
Yeah.
I would also add that as a rezone under state law, the council has to be the decision maker on it. And the other thing is to remember that we've tried to involve the neighborhood and the public much, much earlier. There's earlier steps now for intervention at that point. So the whole concept of our proposed review processes in all accounts is to get the early and effective community input as possible in the process.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And I hope that works. Much of our frustration is simply trying to have the comprehensive plan, the majority of the comprehensive plan upheld in our neighborhood. We don't believe that it's upheld consistently across the city. And so if those earlier processes have some teeth, then I think that, that's a step in the right direction. But considering we have a comprehensive plan already that we don't feel is often upheld, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that whatever earlier process is likely to move us in that direction. But I can be hopeful. I didn't quite understand the comment about the rezone. Yes, I understand that the rezone has to be city council has to.
The way this is constructed as a plan unit development is a rezone decision. And under state law, rezones must be approved by the city council.
I see. So currently it's a CUP, is it not?
Right, that's correct.
Okay, right. So I guess so the question remains then, why is it being changed from a CUP to a rezone?
I guess let Don go first.
Don, who's with our consultant Clarion, also has his hand raised, so he might have comments before maybe staff jumps in as well. Don.
Yeah, the rationale, Richard, is that there are two parts of this. In most communities around the West, a PUD is treated as a rezone. It's not just a way of adding flexibility to a development process or getting a negotiation around a development process. Boise's approach is unusual in the sense that it is sort of like a CUP. It's like something less than a rezone. And in our opinion, that's one of the reasons it's overused, is that when people really need to negotiate or to attach conditions to, or to take cognizance of the unique site conditions, a lot of things go into that process for planning commission approval. Traditionally, if you want to use the negotiation for things that are worth negotiating. And if they are, then you get the same result. You still negotiate them, and with planning and zoning, you have the same decision, same process for negotiating and trying to get an approval that meets what should happen to the land and how the neighbors get their input into it. But then city council approves it. So in our mind, having having planning commission make a recommendation and the city council make the decision has got the same two levels of review. The difference is appeals are technically planning and zoning made a mistake, not we don't like the negotiation and therefore we're going to appeal it again to have city council review it again. Appeals conceptually are, you use them not for a second bite at the apple, you use them when there's been a mistake, when there's a pretty clear error in how somebody has applied the conditions to the decision. So in our mind, it shouldn't be an appeal. It should just be, if you want a second bite at the apple, well, negotiate it, talk about it at planning and zoning, get a recommendation, and then talk about it again at city council. That's kind of how it ought to work, because it's a misnomer to call it an appeal. An appeal technically means somebody made an error, not just I disagree with the decision that was made. So I think this is in a more appropriate two-step review process.
Thanks, Don. I think there are both situations arise, but I think there are times when the issue is the belief that an error has been committed. But I also understand what you're saying. A lot of times it is a disagreement. I guess this discussion it would be helpful to have some data on how often a planning and zoning commission recommendation here in Boise is overturned at the city council level. I'm afraid that the recommendations don't have much teeth, and so there wouldn't be much onus put on the applicant, if it was the applicant or the residents, to do much negotiating, because they would likely just believe that it would be easy to get an overturning of the recommendation. But thanks for that. I'll shut up and let other people talk.
Thanks, Richard. We also had a couple comments, and then Drew has his hand raised. There was a quick question, and I think we can answer quickly, just about the timeline of providing comment and feedback. If there's a hard deadline or soft deadline, I know some people are trying to get their neighborhood feedback collected together. So maybe we just kind of talk about the process staff is going through too.
Yeah, and we can cover this later in the agenda, but staff are going through a week by week review of the code. So we like with a fine tooth comb section by section. And so we have started that. I would say we're still accepting comment on it. I don't know if we put a hard date for feedback. Our staff review will end in January. But again, this is public process, so you can always send us feedback, and we'll even throughout the application process.
And then I'll go with Drew has his hand raised, and then I'll have a couple comments from Esther that I'll read after that. Drew?
Yeah, thanks. Starting to talk within the neighborhood a little bit, and just one of the themes that I'm hearing and I sympathize with a little bit myself is just that it's a complicated document. There's a lot here, and part of the encouragement that I've heard, and I'm hoping glad I can ask the question today, is if there's any expectation or goal to kind of create like I don't know if a citizen guide is the right terminology for it, but something that digests the code a little bit to those core areas that the community often looks to. I don't know if that can be organized by use type, but the code has lots of caveats to it, asterisks, these plus signs, and there's a lot of different areas you have to jump to. And I don't know if it's possible, maybe a lot of the feedback you're getting will highlight those areas, but that's kind of part of the question. And then if not, a theme that I'm hearing also that would be very helpful is if there was just more visual representations of what you mean in these sections. It seems like some of the new content has a lot of that, but there are various areas where those, and it doesn't have to be elaborate or fancy, I don't think, but visualizations that say, allow someone to go, oh, that's what you mean. I think that would be a big benefit to the community as well as they interpret the document.
Yeah, Drew, just to really quickly respond to that, great points. And I think that's something, even in this meeting, we have some slides in a little bit that we'll go through where we've been trying to kind of summarize some of this information and help provide some guidance on how do you really apply the code. And it is a very complicated document. To your point about kind of having a citizen guide, we have had conversations about that. And so that's something that we would love to have feedback from neighborhoods and community members or people from the development community, whoever, specifics about, if you have them, about what would be helpful for you. So like visuals, that's great. And like anything else, as specific as you can be is great, but general comments are welcome too. But helping us know what would be useful for understanding the document will help us to create tools that are actually going to be effective. That is a process that kind of lives outside of writing the code text itself, but it is something that we'll continue to work on as we move through the adoption process. And I think, hopefully into the future as well, right? And there's already some materials on our website to try to understand things like the ADU process. So those could be some examples that you look at for, is that helpful for you or not? What would be better? And we can take it from there. So great comments. Thank you.
Yeah, and could I just add one more thing that I've heard some questions on? Thank you for that, by the way. On parking, for residential parking, it seems like and this is just to help us make sure we're interpreting them right, but there's now a requirement for 1 per dwelling unit. But then when you get to 4, it jumps to 3. And I just wanted to ask the question if that was possibly an error and if the ratio should be 0.5 per bedroom, because the jump from 1 to 3 seems a little like a big leap, if you know what I mean.
So you're saying when you get to, are you talking about bedroom or unit count?
The way we've interpreted it is that it's based on bedroom count, and that when you get to 4 bedrooms, the parking requirement becomes 3. And
So
maybe-
yeah, we should definitely check that, Drew. It is 1 parking spot per dwelling unit. And then we treat 2, 3, and 4 unit residences. So a duplex, triplex, fourplex, that's still 1 per unit. But in an effort to address a specific type of housing, we said if you're a duplex, triplex, or fourplex that has greater than 3 bedrooms, there's an additional requirement for more parking. So the intent, and we'll definitely be cleaning this up. The intent is 1 parking spot per single unit, unless you're multifamily, and then that's a different set of parking standards.
Yeah, and to Deanna's point, with some of those duplex, triplex, fourplex, even though the use is considered kind of the same as like a single family dwelling, so it's following those same parking rules. But if you're getting if you have a fourplex and each unit of that fourplex has 4 bedrooms in it, it's not exactly the same product as what we would be considering under like just a duplex where you have 2 units and each unit is a 1-bedroom unit. The parking needs are conceivably very different for those 2 things. So that we will definitely check it, but there are some nuances there too.
And if you want to follow up, Drew, with the page number, and we can kind of make sure we're interpreting the right thing.
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks.
I'll read Esther's comments that she had said, in reading through module 3, you may want to consider providing examples of projects where the planning director can waive the neighborhood meeting outside of stating when the director doesn't believe there's adverse neighborhood impact. And then the second comment, it pertains to section 11-5-7, violations, enforcement, and compliance. Is the city hiring additional staff to ensure compliance and enforcement of the code, specifically as it relates to the affordability incentives and other new aspects of the code?
I can speak. I think that we are coordinating across our departments. We have our code compliance team reviewing the document with us to make sure that this is something that they can enforce. As well, the affordability covenants, we're working with our housing and community development division, who has a monitoring and compliance team that currently already monitors our existing affordable housing stock. And this would be something that we're tracking on how much new housing the incentives will develop, and do we have staff to ensure that it is being monitored so that it stays affordable.
And then we had one more comment from Roberta, and then Shellen has her hand raised. Roberta said, it is a complicated document, so any way to stair step the concepts for all to understand would be great. And Shellen, go for it.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. So I have 2 questions or comments that you can spend as much or as little time on. One is that I wanted to clarify an offline conversation that I had with staff, which was in the scenario that a utility easement was going to be removed from a parcel. My question had been like, hey, how does this play out in module 3 compared to current? And it was really enlightening because it sounded like in module 3, that level of application, or that level of application, which is really the vacation of a utility easement, would have to go through many, many more steps than the current code requires. And I don't have an opinion of whether or not that's good or bad, as much as I have an opinion of if you have to go through the steps that include, neighborhood outreach and having a neighborhood meeting. I think it's really important that neighbors and developers understand what their roles are, because I'm not an attorney, but it doesn't seem like a neighbor has much control over whether or not a utility easement between a property owner and a public utility district can be vacated if all parties that hold any right to easement agree. And so all I'm saying is, I really just think we need to understand, or it needs to be clear, if you're having neighborhood meetings and requiring to have neighborhood meetings, that the people that are invited know what their role is and what they're allowed, what power they have. And I think, so I just want to reiterate that. I know I talked about that in the past. And then, so that's like the one point is only have more steps if they're going to add value. And then my next point is more like high level, and I don't know if now is the right time to bring it up, but I'll try to be concise, and you all can decide whether or not you want to address it. This is super complicated stuff. The monitoring, that was just asked about is a really important point. How things get judged over time. And it just has occurred to me, and we did talk about this a few sessions ago, but if there is a way to build in progress, right? To build in progress to the zoning code. And what I mean by that is this existing code was created in 1966. And, so it's been 50 some odd years or 70 years. And I just wonder if there's a way via adoption of this, or presumed adoption of a new code, to have some checks and balances over time. Like in year 5, a senior planner needs to tell council, how well it's performed, how many people or how many projects have used this affordability incentive, how many more transit stops have been able to be created due to rooftops, or I don't know what all the metrics would be, but if there's a way to have a sort of performance wrapped into it, so that not only staff, but also leadership is sort of required or strongly suggested to sort of revisit on a relatively regular basis. And it can also be in relationship to transit, because a lot of the high transit routes that we've identified for high density are exactly what we want today. But in 20 years, maybe there's going to be other routes that are also slated for blue ribbon transit or whatever. And is there a point upon which we can sort of force this to be revisited? Sorry if that's not super concise, but I tried.
Yeah, thanks, Shellen. I think that's definitely a conversation that we have internally as staff we've been having throughout this process is, once the code is adopted, what is our process going to look like going forward into the future for how we continue to revisit and refine? Obviously we have a lot of confidence in the huge amount of effort that's going into making sure that we get things right, but it's not until we have the code that we'll really know how everything works on the ground. So that is definitely something that we are tracking to. And so if you have thoughts about the kinds of things that you would like to see sort of examined as time goes on, which you've already mentioned some of them, so thank you for that, but that's always helpful feedback too.
And just really quick, to your first point, Shellen, about knowing roles, we had a really great suggestion at our last community outreach meeting at Bora High School, where it was, is there a way with the reporting of the neighborhood meeting, not only just requiring the developer to send feedback to us, but could the city help with scaffolding of what is the feedback that's relevant to the application type? So what are the things that will have a productive conversation between developer and resident on a project type? So if it's us helping with that scaffolding of comments on, placement of windows, comments on like things that actually affect that only local knowledge can provide in a certain sense.
Thanks. This is Ben.
That's helpful.
Zienfeld.
Thanks.
I really appreciated Drew's comments on the citizen guide. I've gotten that feedback from a lot of folks, including in the development community, that just on how complicated a document is. I think it needs to be complicated, but I think people would appreciate that. Another comment I've gotten from a lot of folks is there's really nobody in the development community locally that has true transit supported development expertise on that MX4 zone. So everyone's just kind of skipping the review of MX4, including me. I mean, I've read it, but I don't really know exactly how that's going to apply to those nodes on State Street. So I just would encourage making sure that gets vetted by somebody who's actually developed in a similar type of zone in a Seattle or a Portland or something like that. And then the other feedback that I had, and I'm still processing it, but it relates to page 313, the use specific building form, the allowed use alternative form. And I'm trying to think through, I think, all the unintended consequences that could come from this. And that's really the angle I'm going for. It applies to a lot of different uses. Some of them are office, which is just a really general part in the use table. Personal and business services is another one that's very generic. Restaurant, brew pub, and retail sales. So this applies to those uses going into buildings that don't meet certain height requirements in the MX1, 3, and 5 zones. And when I first read it, I mean, some of the feedback I've gotten from, I think we've all gotten this feedback from the community. Everybody loves having more commercial in the neighborhoods. So when I think about that MX1 and having this height limitation on bringing office, personal, business services, restaurant, brew pubs, and retail sales, it's a limitation to getting those into the neighborhoods. I think that's going backwards. There is the condition in MX1, which I like, that says if it's in an existing building that's being converted, then they don't have to go through what's effectively a CUP process. So that's nice. But then when you drop over to the MX3 and MX5, that existing building use goes away. So I can just think about a bunch of uses in downtown Boise, like if a restaurant wanted to go in at the old Louis building, they'd have to go through the CUP. We just did the Mother Earth Brew Pub. Rocky Mountain did that, would have had to have gone through a CUP. The bandana running, all those would be CUP processes, which add at least 4 months to the applicant's time frame for getting open, and just adds uncertainty for the process, and is going to clog up city staff doing staff reports on whether or not retail uses should be going into existing spaces in downtown Boise. All of 9th Street, those are all, little retail shops and offices that would be applicable here. So I think this just needs to be thought through more by all of us. And I'm going to continue to think through it, and I'll put that down in some writing to you as well with some suggestions.
Thanks, Ben. And to that last point, I know that's been brought up to us before, and we're thinking about, not wanting to continue to encourage adaptive reuse of existing buildings.
We have a couple comments online that I'll read really quickly. So Richard had said, I agree with Esther that waiving the neighborhood and development meeting is inherently problematic. It's hard to forget that in 2018, Blue Valley was denied a neighborhood meeting for a 99 bay trucking terminal with a fueling station 150 feet from the front doors of their decision by the planning director. And then Drew, he went back to his comment. It was page 263, Deanna, off-street parking. And then he said duplex, triplex, and fourplex all require 3+ parking spots if there are 4+ bedrooms. This almost seems to penalize the use when a 5-bedroom single family detached only requires 1. The issue I've observed is not so much the bedroom count, but the bedroom type. If each bedroom in a 4+ bedroom home, duplex, etc., has a full bathroom that's probably geared to multi household living, is there a way to assess a project that way instead of just a blanket ask for more parking based on the bedroom? Thanks.
Good suggestion, Drew. Yeah, we've been trying to figure out how to recognize the impact that type of housing that you're describing, where it's for, say 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, where it's meant for, single leasees, and how to accurately address the impact of that in a neighborhood, especially in terms of parking. So I think perhaps, adding some sort of layer of a review might be a good suggestion.
Just a suggestion to that. Could there be a section specific definition for bedroom referring to like a duplex or with 4 bedrooms, and you can say a bedroom is this here, but it's this here. I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Byron had a comment and said, to Ben's point about existing buildings, I have been reading about adaptive reuse projects in other communities, and many of the incentives that are used include streamlined approvals since the exterior of the building doesn't change much and no new parking requirements. He said, sorry, I'm in a public spot and can't use my mic. But
Any other comments? Thank you.
This is Brad Nielsen. There's been something that's been on my mind for a couple months now. Maybe this is going backwards, but you had a slide that was the mixed use slide with the incentives for multi-level. It was one of the first slides you had. But what it looked like to me was that we were encouraging 3+ levels there with less reviewed compared to 3 or less. Is that what I'm reading there?
So this is for specific areas in our city. So on State Street, Fairview and Vista, this would apply in the MX, or so anywhere that's in an MX3. And so correct, we have set up a height maximum, which is 60 feet. But what we want to do is encourage directing that development where we have the investment. So in a way to encourage that, we're establishing an allowed use and allowed form, which is what it is allowed. It's allowed to be built up to 60 feet. So it would be reviewed.
So there is a limitation on the height, even if it's what would that be, a 5-story building?
Correct.
And that would be the limitation is 5 stories. Okay.
And, yeah. And so it's just so that we're not kind of to what we heard a lot from our community was we want to know that growth is going to be directed in specific areas where we have the infrastructure and the investment. So one of this is a tool to get exactly what we want, where we want it. So providing an incentive to get that type of development there, as opposed to in other areas of our city.
Is that kind of incentive happening right now?
No. It's
not, because I'm currently working on an apartment building right now. You might probably aware of it. It's Hillcrest. It's a 3-story building. If any place, that would probably have been a good spot to put multiple levels because it's down in a little down below the hill there. So the height wouldn't have been an issue. Maybe the restriction there would have been the parking availability. I think it's 108 units and 120 parking spots. So most likely that parking is going to bleed out into the commercial parking that's there already. So I'm not sure what my point really is there, but that would have probably been a good project that would have allowed for more levels. I'm good to hear that there is a height restriction for these MX up against residential. There needs to be a review on that, I think. So thank you.
Yeah, and this slide is somewhat condensed of the allowed use, allowed form, and alternative form. The stories is the one that's called out, but there's a sort of a menu of criteria that would need to be met in addition to that. So it's not just the vehicle for this is not just, well, yes, we want to have full use of the height that is allowed to you in your zone. Like you're actually taking advantage of the height that you can have in your zone so that we're making use of these somewhat, limited areas of land that we have zoned as MX3, where we have good transit service and we can have that higher density of residents. But there's other stipulations as well. And I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but I think one is like not putting in a huge excess of parking. Some of them might be like, having more than one use within the building, like in an MX1 zone. So there's more detail to it that you might want to look at as well.
And Richard has his hand raised online again. Richard.
Thank you. So today I was writing comments for a city council hearing coming up next Tuesday. but the agenda and the agenda packet have not been posted yet. That didn't used to happen very often. It seems to be more the rule rather than the exception this day and age. So I don't know if it was an explicit policy change, but it'd be a great thing to address here. It's hard to write comments if we don't know the position of city staff or even the agenda. We don't even have the agenda yet. So typically now the agendas are posted a few hours, on Friday, and we have to submit public comments on Thursday. So anyhow, maybe we
So
can
the
address.
next P and Z is November 7th. So staff reports are due tomorrow.
He's talking city council for Tuesday.
Oh, city council.
Yeah,
sorry,
because
okay.
I know that they are posted on Friday. So what I think I'm hearing is you saying changing when neighborhood comments have to be provided because those are included in the packet, but it's hard to see everything that's in the packet. If you're given that before, you can see everything
Okay.
else. Is that what I'm
City
hearing?
council on Tuesday, it doesn't go
Yeah.
until Friday.
So just the timeline of when you guys are required to provide comment. I see.
Yeah. So we, and our comments won't be, they're considered late comments. Just that's the terminology, right? They don't actually go in the packet because obviously you can't have the packet before finalized before all the comments are in. But yeah, so we don't even have the agenda yet as far as what's going to be on city council on Tuesday, and yet we have to provide comments before the agenda is published. So that's a problem, right? That's obviously a problem.
Yeah, that's good feedback.
Thank you.
We ready to move on? Oh, no, I'm sorry, Ben.
No problem. Ben Zamzo, one other comment that came up from another developer in town. I had been explaining that everything in the downtown planning area got mapped to MX5, but he pointed out that the current YMCA and the properties to the north of State Street are in the downtown planning, but it goes pretty deep into the neighborhoods. So what's the thought process on that, and what should owners of that property expect? Should they expect to, because it's now been mapped to MX1, would they come in for a rezone after?
Yeah, so the rule for downtown, and again, the conversion map is still draft, and we're planning to continue to have conversations on that, and we'll release another draft soon. But the initial rule for downtown was if you were one of our higher intensity commercial zones, you were converted to MX5. So if you were C2, C3, C4, C5, and RO, that made the conversion. If you were the lower intensity commercial and office zones, NO, LO, et cetera, I don't think I'm forgetting it. Yeah, PC. I knew there was one more lower intensity. Those stayed MX1. But again, that's something we're evaluating, especially because the downtown planning area does go farther into the near north end. So looking at that with some of the overlays of where there's the historic district, taking a better look at that.
As I talk to folks who own property, and that they believe should be maybe like an MX5 that's adjacent to the MX5, like the YMCA property, for example, would they be encouraged to reach out to you now to try to make that change? Or is the city trying to make more blanket conversions and then encourage people to come in after the fact for rezones?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
I don't want to talk about like a specific project necessarily, but we have tried to make everything convert to something else and not rezone anything. It's like to like. The timing of that project, if it were to come, I think there's a conversation just about like what does that rezone to, but we're not ourselves rezoning anything. There'd have to be some conversations and process around it. So it just depends on when it would happen. As we get closer to adoption or submitting, versus like after the code is adopted. But it's that's a complicated area, and we just aren't going to start like picking other parcels to rezone.
Yeah, I think kind of to Deanna's point, there's always the challenge with the conversion map is that looking for the multi-layered rationale of the current zoning map that we have, the new zones that we have made, and trying to figure out what the straightest conversion to those is. And then also understanding kind of the future land use and how that factors into it as well. So that includes, planning areas from the comprehensive plan, so the downtown planning area, or, are we matching the future land use map so that we're not straying too far from that? So there's a lot of different things that have to go into that rationale for how we develop a conversion and trying to make it as consistent as possible. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but I would say if people have questions about the conversion map, that now is definitely a good time to send us emails about that. And then we'd be happy to like look at the questions or comments that they have.
Yeah, I think the overarching question is, does it make sense what it was and what we're mapping to? And then there might be, and we know there's a few areas where it seems like that conversion doesn't completely solve what maybe the future land use could be, but there's additional study, research, conversation, and then like intentionally looking at these places with more care than just like, it kind of feels like it's something different. Because then it would just start, that mapping wouldn't make that logic pan out.
And we had just one quick comment from Shellen, which I think we've heard from another developer as well, just saying 60-foot max is hard to create 4/1. In other words, if MX3 is wanting to do 4 stories of residential over a level of commercial, it will not be likely. Drew did have his hand raised. I don't see it anymore. Drew, let us know if you have something else to say. Otherwise, we'll go to the next slides.
All right, everyone ready mentally to move on, then we'll go ahead. We, as mentioned, we're working with staff on a weekly basis and going through the code, both for them to better understand it as well as to get their feedback, because they're on the ground meeting clients and the public every day. So their input is critically important to the process. And one of the things we've been trying to do with them is to bring us some case studies and scenarios that we can actually apply the code to, because it's one thing to just read through it, but it becomes more real and living for you when you actually take a property and consider what could be built on it and what the process would be and what the standards would be. So when you move to the next slide, I want to give kudos to Roberta, because she really provided a great segue into this discussion, which is that the process in the code that we look at is really a set of steps. And the first one is zoning district regulations. And I think in the good old days, when somebody came into City Hall and said, what can I do with my property? The planner would look at the zoning code and look at the dimensional requirements in that particular zone where the property was located and said, this is what you can do. And as all of you know that's been through this process, this code is more than that. In order to meet the city's goals and for a number of reasons, we've created a lot more flexibility into what can happen. And we've also tried to reduce the number of conditional use permits through adding, yes, you can have this use in that district, but it requires additional standards. So now we have this stair-step process. When somebody comes to the counter, there's first of all, that first step, the zoning district regulations, but then it's important to look at, okay, is this use allowed there or not? And if it is allowed there, are there some other use specific standards that apply? And then the fourth step is looking at chapter 4 of the development and design standards, which are specific to particular building types, to particular locations, to particular transitional areas. So all of those also play into what can be done with this piece of property. So you want to go to the next slide? So Lena took my, and now I can't read it. Lena took my cooking analogy, my baking analogy, and provided a little less illustrations that again try to explain this, which is that the zoning districts regulations really talk about what kind of baking am I doing? So from the cookbook, they're picking out the baking or the district that they want to do. The table of allowed uses is what the recipe, the specific recipe is that they want to apply. And then the use specific standards are what are the ingredients required in that recipe. And then the development and design standards describe how I can combine the ingredients, how I can process it to make the product. So might be a little silly, but it, given the comments that we've gotten from Drew and others, every way that we can to explain this code in a graphic and simplistic way, I think we're going to try to pursue. So I can move ahead then. So with the staff meetings, we, as I mentioned, are trying to have them bring us case studies that we can apply the code to. And these are a couple, I think, that came from the community meeting. Is that right, Lena? Yeah, these are a couple ones that came up at community meetings, and we thought we would share these with you. And then we're going to ask for you to think of your own case studies, maybe even take your own piece of property and think about something different you would like to do with that piece of property and walk through the code and see how the code would apply to it. So this is a homeowner in the R1A, the large lot zoning district, and they want to build an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard on their large lot. So you can see there's an aerial photo that shows you that middle large lot with the large area of expanse for an ADU. And then the kind of building type they probably would want to build is a unit above a garage. So you want to go to the next slide? Yeah. Okay. And now I can't read these at all. Okay. So using that stair step formula that we talked about, that, the first question the planner is going to ask them is, what zone is the city in? And the answer will be it's an R1A. And they can verify that by looking at the zoning map that's online. And then they can also look at the second chapter, which identifies the residential zoning districts. Then the second question is, are there additional overlays or zoning districts that apply to this? And the answer to that is no. And they can, again, find that in that same chapter on the description of the online overlay districts. And then, is it an allowed use? Yes, it is. They go to the use table and they see it has an A with an asterisk. The asterisk indicates that, yes, it's an allowed use, but there are certain standards that have to be met in order to construct their ADU. And so then the planner would direct them to that section, which has, I think, a half a dozen or so standards related to size, owner occupancy, et cetera. And then, do I need the density requirements for my zone? And yes, an ADU is exempt from the density maximums in the R1A district. And there's the citations for where they can find that information. And then, what dimensional standards do I need to consider? Do I have enough room? And they need to look at the standards related to building height, building setback, and lot size. Those are in addition to the use standards for the particular ADU building. And then we bolded this in the last question, because sometimes this is the one that's the most imperative, and that is, what are the design standards do I need to consider? And those are, number one, as many developers in the room know, parking can really be the bottom line for what can be done on a piece of property. So parking, access, building form, any exceptions, except incentives, hillside restrictions, tree mitigation, et cetera. All of those would apply or could apply in this circumstance and need to be reviewed. So that's kind of our step-by-step look at that example. Anybody have questions at this point? Yeah, I'm sorry. You're good. Okay. Okay, so so in this example, we know an ADU is allowed in the zone. We know the parcel's big enough to build it. We've looked at the use standards, and we know we can comply with those. So what are the other things that are needed to be looked at for this project to work? So since the ADU is an accessory structure, is there flexibility on placing it in the setback? And the answer is yes, we believe so. It meets the definition of an accessory structure. It's detached, and so it can meet those exceptions within, as long as it's less than 400 square feet, 500 square feet, 500 square feet. So looking at those exceptions is an important one to view, because that will allow the existing garage to be used. I need to provide a parking space and want to extend my driveway for the ADU access. What standards do I need to follow? And so here again, these are those more detailed standards that can really make or break a project. And that relates to parking and access and connectivity applicable to that site development. And then finally is the issue of removing trees to make the ADU fit. And can they do that? Then they would have to look at the landscaping and particularly the tree preservation standards that are in that section. So it's this code, because we love it, goes way beyond just the question of can I build in that zoning district? It needs a process of going through these details in order to answer the question whether it would be allowed or not. Any questions about that? Yes, Brad.
I'm sure they're required to meet standards, like sewer. And I know there's still a lot of residential that has septic tanks and obvious drainage fields. So, I mean, who do you talk to there? Is it the CDC or?
Yeah, I think that's the realm of Public Works, and they work closely with planning and addressing those issues as well. So yeah, you're right. Any other comments or questions about that example?
We did have a question that came in from Daniel that's relevant to ADUs, and he asked, are we going to revisit whether ADUs should require owner occupancy? All the pro-housing research shows that the owner occupancy requirement limits the creation of affordable units. Can we have a discussion about this, or are we resigned to the anti-affordable status quo?
Well, we certainly can have a discussion about that. I know that some of the current best practices are eliminating the owner occupancy across the country. I don't know, maybe Don might have some better knowledge about that than I do, but right now there is an owner occupancy requirement in the proposed code. So
yeah, I'm Daniel here. I'm just chiming in. It's just like, this is our chance to change the code. So this is one of these things that, like, if we want to be, support affordable housing in Boise, like all the research says, if you constrain that part of the, landlords from building more housing in their backyards, we're going to have less affordable housing. So I really think we should, I'm a strong advocate of getting rid of this requirement. There's lots of, all the pro-housing groups don't think we should have it. It's, it was a concession to the, to the people who were worried by things. But I don't get the logic of not allowing, somebody who's renting a house to put an ADU in the back and double the amount of units of, affordable rental units in our community.
Yeah. Don has his hand raised, so maybe Don wants to reply to this first.
Well, you're exactly right. This is the right time to revisit it. To be very honest, it's a political answer. Historically, most of the codes we've seen did include an owner occupancy because that made it politically acceptable. People were willing to have something over the garage. If they knew that if anybody misbehaved or there was a problem, they could ring the neighbor's doorbell and they would get the property owner.
Donna, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you speak up just a little bit? It's very hard to hear you in the council chambers.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
It's still pretty quiet.
Okay. I'll keep my answer short then. I'm speaking pretty loud. I don't know what the issue is here. Historically, people were more willing to accept ADUs with an owner occupancy requirement. So the short answer is it was a political compromise made, and in most cases, knowing that it would reduce the number of ADUs. You are completely correct. The trend is to remove that requirement, and the answer is not a technical one. It is whether you can get that passed. It is a matter of balancing the affordable housing need, which is no doubt very great, with the citizens' willingness to accept both of the nearby properties as rentals. And there has
Yeah, I
been.
mean, I get, so Don,
efforts.
thank you, and I think that's exactly right. And again, if we can't, if we can't make that change, then we should just remove the claim that we care about affordable housing, that we're trying to make housing more affordable in Boise, right? Because this is a part of the market. You have landlords who, I know a company that focuses on building ADUs in Seattle, and they were interested in Boise as a market. They came here. They met with folks at the city, and they said, we're not going to come into Boise because of this requirement, because we just know that it does, so you can say, well, maybe that's good because then local contractors don't have competition, but it's not, because they figured out how to make them cheaper, and they're not in this market because we have this constraint. So it's just if we can do one thing in this thing, come on, let's give her, this is such a terrible requirement. It's so anti-affordable housing. It's embarrassing. Okay,
Well,
I'll shut up now.
The thing I would say is that, like most things in ADU, all of the parade of potential horribles, oh my gosh, this will happen, this will happen, this will, don't happen. I will say that, as people have said, oh, it'll, putting it in the neighborhoods will ruin the neighborhoods. No evidence. It's the fight to get it adopted. Once it's adopted, you don't hear horror stories.
With the rules we've had 100 units a year. We haven't, we've done the experiment of with this constraint, and we're getting 100 ADUs a year. Let's try to ease up a little bit. Let people who have capital and know how to run a rental unit have access to this market.
My only point was that as this restriction on APUs has been lifted in a growing number of communities, we haven't heard horror stories as a result of it. So there are a lot of theoretical parade of horribles related to ADUs. Generally, they don't play out.
There's just a couple comments online, and then we'll go over to Brad. Shellen just quickly said, I agree, Daniel, it's low hanging fruit. And then Francis said, the zoning code map does not seem to indicate a likely conversion for parcels or lands that are not yet annexed into the city. Is there a process in the code that describes annexation and code conversion for currently unincorporated areas?
To Francis's point, yes, we don't create zoning for areas that are not within city limits. We do have, that's where the comprehensive plan comes in our future land use map that does have land use designations. And then just in the very first chapter of the code, general provisions, it describes how we approach in terms of process, the area of city impact, and if annexation occurs, as well in process and procedures for the actual process to annex land.
As usual, I'm going to completely disagree. I think restrictions on ADUs is a good idea. I have no problem with family members living in the, in another unit, but I think this encourages the bed and breakfast or the Airbnbs, whatever that is, and discourages ownership. I think we got enough rentals around here, and I think that's a problem. I don't think that helps with affordable housing. I think it encourages higher rents. There's more money being made on bed and breakfast or whatever that is they call that. So yeah, I disagree.
Thanks, Brad. And Richard looks like he has his hand raised, and then I'll kick it back over to Diane. Sorry, Diane.
Thanks. Yeah. Since we're opening this up a little bit. So we often are discussing the public process under the belief that, Boise is onerous in its public process, and that makes it difficult to approve units. And we just, one thing that's frustrating to me is that we haven't seen the data that show that the public process is the issue that's slowing things down or creating barriers to affordable housing. I just noticed there's the Wharton Residential Land Use and Regulation Index. CoreLogic published this just a little bit ago, and Boise is in the bottom 25% of metro areas in terms of regulation stringency. So in general, it's not a city that is difficult to develop in. Also, we often hear, well, along the same lines there, Boise, when they put out their findings regarding what are the barriers to affordable housing, this was the one, I haven't looked at the new one, but the older one said, here's a quote, "One of the challenges in working a project through the development review process is the applicants often do not provide the full depth of informative and information and disclosure allows planners and reviewers to approve a development proposal in a timeliest manner." It doesn't say anything about it's the public that's slowing down the process. So I would really like to see some data that from Boise, that show that it's the public getting in the way that is the problem and the barrier for affordable housing. So thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the second example. Oh, and this is the application process that the ADU would go through. It's a type 2 allowed use. So it would require a concept review committee meeting, application submittal at 100%, and a staff report and a decision. So let's go to the second example, and this one's a little more interesting. This is a developer who wants to build a multifamily project at Bannock, and I think between 19th and 21st. It's a very, as you can see, and some of you probably know this lot, it's a pretty unique lot in its configuration.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to make a disclaimer here. These are hypotheticals. I went on the map and I looked for a vacant parcel in an R3 zone, and I picked this one in particular because it has some interesting issues with the site shape, and so it just seemed like a fun case study for if this is an R3 zone and an apartment is an allowed use in an R3 zone. These are important to go through and to look at. This is what the process would be under the new code. And so I think it's good that it's a relevant one, but I don't think I realized just what a passionate subject this parcel is for people. So
we didn't do it on purpose because it's in your neighborhood. So, okay, so let's look at the, I have to look at the code. Yeah. So going through that step process again, what is the zoning? It's R3, and you can find that on the zoning map and in that first chapter. Are there additional overlays in this district, in this area? No, there's no overlay provisions. Is this an allowed use? Again, yes, it is, with that asterisk, which means there's standards related to multifamily development as an allowed use. And do they meet the density requirements? R3 does not have a density limit. So there's additional standards on residential districts. There's a summary tables of the dimensional requirements. All of those would apply to that project. And then what other dimensional standards do I need to consider? The building height, the setback, the lot area. And then this one for this lot, because it's so unique in configuration, what are the design standards that I need to consider? And so really challenging for that lot will be parking and access, building form, hillside will not apply, tree mitigation may, I don't think so, it looks like it's a pit. But there's certainly going to be some access, parking, and determination of lot setbacks because of the odd configuration of that lot. So a lot of things there to consider with that piece of property. Okay, so we know the apartment building is an allowed use. It meets the density, height, and requirements. I also know there's use standards that we need to go through. What else is relevant? So there's some transition standards because it is adjacent to no, it's not adjacent to R2. Okay, it is adjacent to R2. Yes. Okay. So are there some transition standards? Well, I think staff probably needs to answer that then, because this is an R3 to an
Yeah,
R2.
so this is an important nuance. We have what's set up as neighborhood transition standards, but that's when it's transitioning to what we call our R1 neighborhoods, and that's when the standards apply. However, there's some specific use-specific standards around multifamily that help it fit within a neighborhood. So you have to look at both those things. It's not just one or the other.
And then I want to incorporate affordable housing into the project. Are there incentives available? Everybody shaking their head, yes?
Actually, for an R3, I don't believe that there would be, no.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so as we're going through these questions, the kind of idea here, again, like showing this as a case study of, okay, what would happen if somebody looked at this parcel and said, I want to put a project here? The answer of, can I put an apartment here, yes or no, is not answered on this slide. This is just showing, okay, if I know that I have to look at development and design standards, where are the other places in the code I'm going to have to look? And so you can see that these are all things that would have to be considered of whether or not this could happen. So, and for the question of the incentives available for R3, the answer would be, no, there's not.
And then what kind of parking standards are required? And those citations related to accessible parking, electric vehicle and bicycle parking would all apply to this project. That's correct?
Yes, that's correct, because it's a multifamily. So obviously you're going to want to look at your parking table, but then somebody would also have to consider not just what your parking dimensional standards would be and what your parking count would be. You need to think about accessible parking spaces. There will be some provisions for electric vehicle charging facilities. And then of course the required bicycle parking that's in there as well.
And then the last question related to, am I eligible for parking reductions?
That would depend on what kind of services they would provide. So if you go to the parking adjustment section, there's rules about if you provide X number of motorcycle parking spaces, you can get some reduction in vehicle parking spaces. Depending on what the use is, you could enter into some sort of like transit demand management program, like if you were an employer, for example. So there's a whole list of them there. So that's where somebody would go to find out if they would be able to get a parking reduction. They're referenced in other places in the code too, but we highlighted this one because that's kind of a spot in the code that summarizes all the different parking adjustments that you might be eligible for.
Okay, any comments about that one? So in terms of application procedures, there's a review of the allowed use, which would be that first line. It's a type 2 decision. And then it's a major design review application. So it's a type 3 and would go through the neighborhood meeting and the review process with the design commission. So different steps for both parts of that. So, and I think it's important to keep in your mind that, this application includes both a review of the use and as well as the design, the physical parameters of it. Deanna, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to show, like, really walking through all of those questions, and probably some of, those who use the code understand all of this, but this is how, when a planner is reviewing an application, they're reviewing to make sure that what is proposed by the developer meets all of those questions. So it is an incredibly intricate process. So even if something is an administrative review, it is still being scrutinized to make sure that it is meeting those standards and that what is proposed aligns with our code and that it's actually approved.
Thanks. So is everybody's brain hurting at this point? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to pause here. So if we're looking at like a type 2, which is an allowed use, allowed form for a multifamily project, we're effectively adding, I know this isn't the right way to think of it, but we're effectively adding 2 steps on the front end of the process as it stands currently, with the concept review meeting at 25%. And then I guess you kind of say where the pre-app currently falls in there is debatable, but is that correct? Okay.
Yes and no. Yes, I would say, because I think that if you were to talk with, some of the staff here at the city, what we might respond with is that when we thought about what these steps are, there's nothing happening in these steps that isn't happening already. It's more that people sort of throw things out into the void, and then there's a long waiting period to try to get everything sorted out. And there's no way to bring everybody to the table. So we're sending out transmittals and then waiting to hear back from other agencies. So the purpose of these steps is it's not really, when we sat and tried to design this process in a way that would work both internally and externally, there's not really anything additive here. It's more of a reorganization of all of the work that we're currently doing, but with some clarity around this is what gets discussed at this point, and then at point B, and then at point C. So for example, when you have the concept review meeting, and as you can kind of see this doesn't show the old process on it, but you can sort of see a nod to it when we have showed what the old process is, which is you get a pre-application meeting where the concept could be pretty much 0 to 100%. So as we like to say, anything from a drawing on a napkin to somebody might actually come in with a site plan, and there's no predictability around what exactly is the expectation at that pre-application meeting of what we know that we're responding to as staff. So the idea here is you have somebody coming in where there's a certain criteria for like, this is what meets like a basic concept. And then we can talk to you before you get too far down the road and say, like we just did walking through these slides of, hey, make sure that you're looking at all of these parts of the code because you're going to want to consider those. Go ahead and think about that. Let us know when you're ready to move on to the next step, and then we'll talk again. Make sure that we're still in alignment. Then we'll talk to our agency partners, and then you can submit your application. Currently, right now, if somebody has their pre-application meeting, then they just go ahead and submit. If that application isn't really fully complete, then it wastes a lot of staff time having to run around trying to get things from the developer or from the applicant, making sure that we have all of the information that we need to actually apply the standards correctly. Because if information is missing, you can't really fully apply the standards in a way that makes sure that we're meeting all of our requirements and meeting our goals. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
No, that's helpful because that's probably one of the biggest points of feedback I've gotten from people, developers, architects, designers. So I think it's good and helpful to think of it as a redistribution of steps that are already taking place. Good, thank you.
There's also a couple of comments online. Some of them go back to an earlier conversation, but I just want to make sure that everybody hears them aloud as well. Roberta said, I view rentals and Airbnbs as two different entities. I see rentals as a path to affordable housing. Landowners who rent make less money than those who do vacation rentals. Unfortunately, zoning isn't able to address vacation rentals. And then Byron said, Daniel, many of the landlords that I have spoken with that were frustrated about owner occupancy requirement of the ADU code were trying to work around the duplex standards in the first place. With the new code, duplexes may be much easier to convert, and some of those issues may be alleviated. And then Drew said, I'd agree with Daniel, and if compromise is needed, why couldn't the ownership requirement lift as zoning intensity is increased? And then Byron said, also the Seattle ADU builder that we met with had issues with a foundation system that wouldn't work in Boise. That was the final straw for them. And then Shellen had a final comment saying affordable incentives should be allowed anywhere that allows multifamily. And Shellen had to sign off for the meeting. But those are the last comments so far. I think we talked about that. Yeah. Don't go off script, Jessica.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so we are not meeting next month because it'll be Thanksgiving unless we all want to come here, have our dinner together. So you have 2 months, and in that 2-month period, we want you to continue to look at the code and review it. But also, if you would bring up a case study, look at your property or some property that you're familiar with, and think about a proposal for it. And then walk yourself through the code in terms of what would be required to make that proposal reality. And then bring those and share them. That's kind of a homework assignment for you all to do by our December meeting, which is, and I forgot the date.
December 8th.
December 8th. So it's the second Thursday, not the third Thursday in the month. So
Yeah, with the holidays, we kind of did a hybrid. Figured it'd be good to do 6 weeks. We still have community outreach going on over the next couple of weeks. There'll be Thanksgiving in there, and then we'll see you before the holidays. And then I think again once more in January, and then that will we'll go from there.
And then in the meantime, staff is continuing to meet. And if we come up with some interesting case studies through that process, we'll bring them before you too, so you can get the benefit of that. But I think the more we can kind of test the code in real life, in real time, I think we'll start to see if there's some real significant issues or some things that we need to work out a little bit more. But I think this will be a good exercise for all of us. So we will do that. And then, yes, community outreach continues. And hopefully some of you will be able to attend one or all of these meetings. And reminder of where you can find information on the website. And
our attendees that were online dropped off just a few minutes ago. So if anybody else has any other comments. Roberta said thanks.
I think the only thing I would add to just to what Diane had said, because this came up in our staff review meeting earlier today, where we were also kind of going through these case studies. If it's helpful to sort of how we're trying to approach this is really getting back to the conceptual root of why are we doing this in the first place, right? Why are we rewriting our zoning code? And it's because we want it to do the things that we want it to do. We want to see the city grow in a way that benefits everyone and that gets us to, the future that we'd like, where we have affordable housing and we have great walkable neighborhoods and a variety of neighborhoods. So when you're looking through, whether it's your own property or somewhere else, if you want to kind of run it through as a practice, it's been really helpful for us thinking about, okay, well, what would we like to see happen? And then try to make it happen with the code, and then ask yourself, is it possible or not? And if the answer is yes, are there the right, processes and requirements in place to make that the best possible project? And if the answer is no, you might look at it and say, okay, well, what needs to change then? Is it maybe our dimensional standards are overly restrictive? Maybe they're not restrictive enough. Maybe our table of allowed uses could use another look. So these are all things that we can think about as we go through these scenarios, but always with that idea of, what do we want to see? And does the new code make it possible for us to realize that vision or not?
And then we had one question that came in from Roberta, just saying, are the comments in the chat included in the notes? Lots of good comments on the chats. Thanks, everyone. Lots of food for thought. I don't think Andrew usually does the notes.
I'm taking notes right now. I'm trying to, when we've read the comment, I've been trying to type it or summarize it. So it's not verbatim in the notes.
And as a reminder, these meetings are on YouTube, so you can go back and rewatch as well. Those are on the City of Boise Public Meetings YouTube, so you can go back as well. And I read all the comments other than just a few that just said thank you. So, and there's a few more thank yous that came in.
I think we're adjourned for this session.
Great.
Good to see everybody. Have a good Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And happy Halloween.